Previously on Convicted.
You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. This call is from
Richard Nicolas.
an inmate at a Maryland correctional facility. This call will be recorded and monitored. If you wish to block any future calls of this nature, dial 7 now. To accept this call, press 0 now. To decline this call, hang up. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hello, Brooke.
Hi, this is Brooke, and this isn't your standard episode. I had a great plan to do a panel episode with Richard as part of the panel. The thing was that during the time of the panel, his facility was on lockdown, which means he couldn't get to the phone. Don't worry though, I still asked your questions to Richard. So the episode is set up like this. First, questions with Richard. Then the rest of the panel, and then finally, thoughts with Richard at the end. It's not your typical episode, but it's also not your typical panel. I really hope you enjoy this episode of Convicted. Are you hiring? Do you know where to post your job to find the best candidates? This is how ZipRecruiter is different from those other services. With ZipRecruiter, you can post your job to 100 plus job sites with just one click. Then, their powerful technology efficiently matches the right people to your job better than anyone else. That's why ZipRecruiter is different. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you, it finds them. In fact, over 80% of jobs posted on ZipRecruiter get a qualified candidate in just 24 hours. No juggling emails or calls to your office. Simply screen, rate, and manage candidates all in one place with ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard. Find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. And right now, my listeners can post jobs on ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/convicted. That's ZipRecruiter.com/convicted. One more time. To try it for free, go to ZipRecruiter.com/convicted. We're going to start with the conversation I had with Richard. He answered a lot of listener questions. So the first thing I want you to do is to tell me, what does it look like where you're standing?
They have like a bank of telephones, 12 phones all side by side, going up the sidewall, and they are maybe 2.5 feet. 2.5 feet away from each other, and it's guys kind of pack in so they can talk on the telephone. Right now, maybe.
So does it sound very private, huh?
No, not at all. Right now, maybe 15 or 20 guys are in here with me, and they're all playing cards and cooking food and talking on the telephone. This is our 12:30 recreation time, and it's if you don't have to go to work, then you can come out and hop to the shower, talk on the telephone, watch TV and stuff. We're gonna all get locked back in the cell at 1:30, 1:45 or so. So we get like a hour and a half out to where you can take care of what you're trying to take care of, and then you lock back in the cell where they do afternoon count time.
So are you ready for some questions?
Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Okay, so these are questions listeners sent that they wanted to know your answers to. And some of these are things we've already talked about. Okay, so question number 1, they wanted to know if after you were arrested, did you ever have any kind of psychological evaluation or any kind of evaluation of your mental health?
Over at Baltimore City Jail. Yes, I did. Over at Baltimore City Jail, Howard Carden had me put onto the psychiatric house unit there because it would have been easier for me than being put into general population. And part of the process was that they run me through the psychiatrist. Did I come out with a psychiatric diagnosis? No, I did not. What they did was they gave me sleeping pills and told me not to start up a whole lot of problems and stuff, and everything would be smooth sailing while I was there.
So, question number 2. People want to know why you left Asia in the car when you went to get help.
Because she was not in a movable condition. She was unresponsive, and it was a instantaneous thing that I was obviously outclassed by the situation, and that I had to get help to her. With that type of situation, you've got to bring the hospital to the patient because of the fact that moving her is only going to do further, damage. So.
Okay, and you said you were outclassed by the situation. Does that mean that her injury was more severe than something that you were able to attend to on your own?
Yes, very much so. And that was a instant decision. I mean, it was just part of my EMT training to make the best call that I possibly could right then and there. And it's just that was the best call to make, was to go get help as fast as I possibly could.
Okay, so that brings me to the next question. You said to go get help as fast as you possibly could. So people have asked, why didn't you drive?
Because it would have just bounced her around further, and it would have caused more injury. It wouldn't have helped. It's what I did was the proper thing to do. Plus the fact that I didn't have a cell phone or anyone else to try to flag down. It's what I did was the right thing to do in, leaving her momentarily, and to, run as fast as I possibly could up to the nearest phone and get some help to her.
People have asked, why did you park on the wrong side of the street?
That's I don't know. That's just, I don't know. That's just where I pulled over to.
So, okay, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Do you know, did the police ever find the murder weapon?
No, they did not. I remember after I was over at Baltimore City Jail, I had seen this one newspaper article where it was from the crime scene, and they were searching for a murder weapon, and they had earth movers and like bulldozers digging up earth trying to find this thing. And I remember that the Sun paper had a picture of one of the more flamboyant homicide cops, Detective Daryl Massey, sitting there on the curbside with his head down in his hands, looking like he was trying to hide from the camera, just, out of frustration. And my whole thing was, I had told them that the murder weapon went driving off with the guy that, and they never found it. No, they never tried to find the guy. No, they never found the murder weapon.
Did any of the guns that you had owned match the caliber of the bullet that they recovered?
Were they the same caliber? Yes. Homicide said that the murder weapon was a .357, which is a big bullet. I had owned, I think, three .357s over the course of my target shooting, hunting period. None of them were the murder weapon. I had owned .357s, 9mm, 45s, and it's none of my handguns proved to be the murder weapon. Also, I had accounted for all of my handguns that I had ever owned at the court trial through ownership bills of sales. I had extremely meticulous paperwork on where all of my handguns were.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch gears on you again. A couple of people have asked, why would Officer Hannah not have opened the door? Like, what would be the reason that she would have been pulled out of the window?
She wouldn't have been. She wasn't. That's just it. Hannah did not help. It's as soon as we got back to the scene, Hannah looked inside the car and started zapping out. Ran to the back of my car and he started pounding on my trunk area, screaming at me, pull her out, pull her out. I then opened up the car door and pulled her out. Then I laid her down and put my T-shirt under her head. By the time that I looked back up, 911 services were pulling onto the scene.
You're saying Officer Hannah never touched her? Okay, so tell me about the gunshot residue test that they did. What did it look like? How did they do the test?
Okay. It's they had these two metal test stubs. If you take a dime-sized metal circle with a metal stud glued to the back of it, and that's what it looks like. Then they dab the instep, dab the web area of your hand in between your thumb and your forefinger. So it's a fairly small area. They had said that I had tested negative on my right hand and positive on my left hand for 10 particles. It was 10 particles. Okay. GSR consists of lead, barium, and antimony. It was explained at my court trial that when a handgun is fired, that it will expel literally thousands of particles of GSR. They had said that I tested positive for 10 particles out of.
Wait, can I ask a question? Okay, I'm gonna let you finish explaining. We've got 8 minutes left. Where were you tested at? Like at the police station, at the crime scene?
Yeah, homicide headquarters. Homicide. Yes, inside the police station.
Okay, so prior to that, you had been in a police car, correct?
Handled by the officers.
Right, you'd been handled by the officers, and you had touched Asia.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay, and so tell me, I know that you have done a lot of research on this. Is 10 particles consistent with coming into contact with any of those things?
Yes, it would be. When you have such a extremely low particle count, it is indicative of secondary contact. It's when a handgun gets fired, it's going to expel thousands of GSR particles. Back then, homicides, electron microscopic X-ray test stopped counting at 200 particles. So I had 0 on my, dominant hand, right hand, and then only 10 on my left hand. It's the whole thing screamed secondary contact. Plus the fact that Baltimore City had a big GSR contamination issue. GSR down in Baltimore City is now deemed junk science.
So I know GSR is your passion, but we have 4 minutes left, so I have to switch, okay?
Okay.
Someone wants to know, did you have any enemies?
At the time? I didn't think I did. I was a ambulance driver. I fixed photocopiers.
So you didn't have anybody who hated you enough that they wanted to shoot you?
I didn't think so, no.
Did you have any gambling debts?
Gambling debts? No. I didn't gamble.
Okay, so remember, I know that we talked about this before, but do you remember when I asked you, Lisa said that you had made like a hand gesture as you were pulling away. Do you remember that at all?
A hand gesture? Away from the house? I remember that you would ask me about it, but no, I did not. No. No, I did not.
People want to know, why was Asia not in a car seat?
I know this might sound horrible, but I didn't think she needed one when I, put the seatbelt on her. She fit fine, and it's. I thought she was good to go the way she was. So, I really didn't stress about it.
I use stamps.com every single day. I use it to send out my bills, to send out the swag I send to people, and to return the impulse buys that I get from the internet. And I can send things domestically or internationally. If you've gotten something from me in the mail, you've probably experienced stamps.com. I mean, stamps.com brings all the services of the Postal Service right to your fingertips. I have my very own post office with no wait sitting on my desk. I use stamps.com because I'm strapped for time and it's so convenient. Plus, I love the stamps with my logo on them. And recently, the road to the post office from my house has been closed. So once what was a 5-minute drive is now a 30-minute excursion. And right now, you too can enjoy the stamps.com service with a special offer that includes a 4-week trial plus postage and a digital scale without long-term commitments. Go to stamps.com, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in convicted. That's stamps.com, enter convicted. Stamps.com. Never go to the post office again. This is the panel section. Rachel Kamens, Amberly Nichols, Brendan Kenny, and I all talk about some of the issues that have been discussed on the podcast. Oh my gosh, Rachel, are you there?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Brendan, are you there?
I am.
Amberly, are you there?
Here I am.
Oh my gosh, this is...
It's happening.
I'm so excited right now. If only Richard were here. Happy birthday, Richard.
Happy birthday, Richard.
In absentia.
Our guest host is Brendan Kenny. Brendan, can you say a few words about yourself?
I'd be happy to. I'll try to keep it brief. I'm a lawyer in Minneapolis. I practice civil litigation. I'm obsessed with legal persuasion and trial tactics. I'm on Periscope and Twitter, and I've been interested in this case since I heard about it for the first time on Undisclosed more than almost 2 years ago, and I'm just pleased as punch to be here. We're now going to be joined by our panelists, Rachel, Amberly, and of course, Brooke here. Would you like to introduce yourselves and talk about where you're at, feeling about this case so far?
Sure. I'm Rachel Kamens, and I'm Richard's attorney. I have been his attorney in the past, and I'm recently back to working on his case. And what does that mean about my feelings on the case so far?
What are your feelings on the podcast so far?
Oh, I've been thrilled to be both working on this podcast and as a listener, because I think this is one of the most fascinating criminal cases that I could ever imagine. One also that is incredibly important in the issues that it brings to light about fair trials and fair play by the government in a criminal matter. So I think, Brooke, that you're doing a magnificent job with your own unique twist that you bring to it. That's all I got to say.
Okay, so obviously I'm Brooke. I have been telling this story, and I just wanted to share that I get a lot of questions about, did he do it? Is he innocent? Is he guilty? And I just want to make it very clear that my feelings on the case are, maybe, but he did not get a fair trial. And that's what I'm really trying to bring to light, is the fact that this trial was not fair. It was not the way our justice system was supposed to work. And so wondering if he's innocent or guilty, or sending me an email saying, I think he's guilty and you're not convincing me otherwise, that's okay, because I'm not trying to. Just, I want you to look at the legal practices that were put into place and imagine that it was you or a member of your family. And I'm kind of going to lead into my friend. Her name is Amberly, and we used to work together at an office. I'm going to let her introduce herself and her area of expertise.
Hi, I'm Amberly Nichols. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a certified autism specialist. I've been interested in this case because people's reactions to Richard's reactions have been interesting and disturbing. Someone who works with traumatized children and children who have different neurologies, the difficulty that people have with accepting that people could react differently than they would as your quotey finger standard neurotypical person. It's just been really disturbing to me, so I kind of wanted to come address that issue.
All right, Brendan, you got some questions for us?
Yes, I do. And I'm just so happy to be here and happy to hear your thoughts on all this. I want to start out by asking the feelings about how Richard's stuttering was handled at trial. Someone asked about that, and throughout the whole process. I'm feeling like it wasn't addressed very well, and I want to get everyone's take on that.
Can I go first? Because I have
Yes,
really
please.
strong feelings about this.
I also have strong feelings, so this will be fun.
Me too.
So when in the episode where we talked about jury selection and the instructions that the judge gave to the jury, the judge specifically told the jury that they must consider every nuance, every manner of speaking, basically everything that he did while he was on the stand, when considering if he was telling the truth or not. But the things that she was describing were the things that make Richard Richard. And so to tell them that they need to base his credibility on parts of his persona, you should see me talking with my hands right now, on the parts of his persona, his personality, his mannerisms that make him who he is, feels like she basically said, you need to be biased against him because he acts like this, and that can be perceived as being dishonest. That is my opinion.
Who wants to go next?
I'll go next. While speech disorders and autism aren't the same thing, they're both based in neurological differences in the brain. So one of the questions that I've seen people raise is, well, okay, he had a speech impediment, but that doesn't have anything to do with him being calm or him not being calm. Like, that doesn't have anything to do with him being upset. One of the interventions that I use with my autistic kids is rehearsal, 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 rehearsal. And one of the reasons that is so important is because neurology is different. Someone who is autistic or someone who has a speech disorder doesn't access the skills like a neurotypical person would access those skills. So it requires a lot of rehearsal so that you can access that in the moment. It's my understanding, and Brooke, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Richard has had a lot of practice with drilling the skill so that he can stay calm so that he can be understood. So while it might not make sense to most people, why are you so calm? He even said it in a previous episode, like, I knew that my daughter needed help and I can't talk when I'm upset. So I think that there's the connection. That is your connection, is he had to stay regulated so that he could access those speech skills. And he had a lot of practice doing that. So I guess to me, being in the field that I'm in, that makes sense to me, that someone would react in that way. If you knew that your baby needed help, you were going to kick into whatever skill you had acquired in practice so that your baby would get that help. That is my opinion.
And I'll chime in here that when I first met Richard in 2008, it was on the telephone, and I was not accustomed to speaking with a person who had such a severe stutter that there would be lengthy pauses in between his words and his sentences. And I remember feeling like I had no idea when it was appropriate for me to speak next, because that ordinary give and take of dialogue was missing in the interactions with him. And, I would decide that enough time had passed that it would be appropriate for it to be my turn to speak. And right at that second, he would be continuing his word or his sentence. And it just made for an incredibly awkward discourse. And when I met him, obviously early on, we had some very, very open, honest, heart-wrenching conversations and, about the topic of the case and the murder of his daughter. And I was a little unfamiliar with the stoicism that I saw from him in talking about these really heart-wrenching matters. And I thought, well, gosh, how do you just not fall to pieces, crying, just even talking about it? And over time, I learned what these two other women have just talked about, the intense amount of training that Richard had undergone in order to be able to speak. And it's almost like a full body experience for him to physically control his words by dramatically slowing down his speech.
I need to
And so to
point out that when you said that, Amberly is in the same room as me, and she was like cheering you on about the full body being needed to speak.
Absolutely. You got that. You nailed that 100%. Yeah.
You remember also that Mary, his sister, said this in the other panel episode where, and Brooke and I have both witnessed it, where he actually sometimes gets into, I don't know what the right word is, but gets stalled in something that he's trying to say, and he leans forward with his upper body, and he sort of leans even further forward with his head, and he's like almost willing the words to come out. When we used to have arguments, you know, because obviously I play a lot of devil's advocate with my clients and trying to flesh out the truth of things, and I would notice that there'd just be silence from him. And I realized finally, after being with him in the same room, that if I got him angry enough or if he got upset enough, no words came out. He just simply couldn't speak. So at the trial, I guess, Brandon, to answer sort of your question more pointedly, it was definitely conveyed to the jury through Richard's testimony and through opening statements and closing arguments of his attorneys that the stutter was the explanation for why he was perceived to be acting so abnormally at the scene of the crime. But it wasn't, as you also said, it wasn't handled fully or well enough. And there clearly were more sources of information on the subject that the jury could have been presented with and should have been presented with, because that was really why the police decided he was guilty from the jump, was that he had these, you know, not upset enough reactions to what occurred, and therefore, you know, he must be guilty of doing it.
And this is a really remedial question, but I didn't remember it being said. So Richard took the stand in his own defense?
Yes.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And without getting into too much into legal strategy, I don't want to delve into that, but do we know if that was at his insistence, or it was seen to be necessary for the jury to understand how he presented after his daughter was shot?
Well, certainly on the question of what we're talking about, you know, what his reactions were, it was a defense strategy insofar as it was necessary for the jury to see Richard speak. That was really the only way that they were going to be able to explain why Richard's reactions were and are the way they are. So putting him on the stand was definitely to address that aspect of the case. But his testimony was quite extensive and covered, you know, just as importantly as the stuttering, it covered the events of that night, you know, and sometimes or oftentimes in a criminal case, the defense doesn't get on the stand to present their version of events. But in this case, his version of events was dramatically different from the state's version of what happened. And yes, I'm sure Richard was insistent to testify, but I do think it was absolutely the right defense move to put him on there to tell his story.
And many of the questions are similar in that they involve what other work might have been done by anybody, not just the police, to follow up on other leads. So I wanted to start out with, was there any kind of follow-up done on the driver in the car, the other one that Richard said was there, including tire tracks, shell casings, things like that?
It is my understanding, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was no investigation of anyone except for Richard. I mean, I've seen photos of the car. I've seen photos of the crime scene, but I've not read, people in the area being questioned about the road rage driver, or that there is investigation of this gun, like trying to match the bullet to a gun that someone else might have had. There was no investigation into anyone except for Richard.
So they, just to kind of jump on that, as far as I'm remembering, there was no analysis, like reconstruction of the crime scene insofar as like tire tracks or that. I mean, it's an interesting question, but no, I don't think anything of the sort. They did put out a radio broadcast for an individual matching the physical description that Richard gave to the police of that driver. They did tear up the vicinity, like actually I think used bulldozers and things like that to try to locate a weapon in the case. I don't believe that they found any shell casings or any, bullet material. I think there was one bullet, and it was in the child's head, unfortunately. They investigated to an extent, but the police did investigate to a limited extent the condition of the rear bumper of the vehicle to either dispel Richard's story about having been tailgated and bumped from behind, or to confirm it. And it was based on, I think, just a visual assessment at the scene. The defense got an expert to refute this, but the police, upon their visual inspection at the scene, did not think that there had been any contact with the rear of Richard's car and another vehicle.
The other area about investigation being done is about the movie theater. Employees at the movie theater, cameras possibly at the movie theater. Now, I know you said that the police didn't do anything else. Did any defense investigators go down that alley?
Well, actually, let me just say that I suppose it isn't accurate to say the police didn't do any investigation regarding the road rage incident in the sense that they did, in addition to what we just talked about that they did, which wasn't a whole heck of a lot, they did attempt to interview people and did interview people who were in the vicinity that night. So there was a hotel nearby, and they tried to interview people. Actually, at some point, did a subpoena for records of hotel guests that evening, talked to some people about what they saw, what they heard. So there was some investigation done, but that was after they had already arrested him and had him in custody and had him charged.
Well, my impression was too, they went to the movie theater. They tried to verify it, but I don't believe it was in search of an alternative suspect. I believe that they were doing it to find evidence to pin the crime on Richard. I mean, I think that the trial, they had a movie theater employee testify who was 17 that he saw someone who looked like someone that he knew that looked like Richard at the theater. He was not able to point him out in court. He was not able to say that it was him for sure. Or he saw someone in the theater that looked like someone he played basketball with that night wearing similar clothes to what Richard was wearing. It was, the testimony was so unbelievable to me. How can you put someone on the stand who can't identify anybody for certain?
So he basically said that he saw a light-skinned African-American man.
Yeah, that looked like someone he used to play basketball with.
Who he did not remember being in the company of a small child.
I wonder how many people fit that description that night.
In Baltimore. One question there were a few questions about Asia's mother. I wanted to look at this one. It said, why hasn't anyone looked further into the inconsistent statements made by her, especially the ones about focusing suspicion on Mr. on Richard Nicolas. And I'm assuming there was, wait, let me back up, and I forget right now. Was she, did she take the stand?
She did. She was the first person to testify. I would actually really like to stay clear of talking about Asia's mother because I think she has had enough trauma. But my opinion is that her little girl got into a car with a man and didn't come home. And no matter if she thinks that he pulled the trigger or not, she blames him for that. And that's my belief. But I have had questions about suspicion being placed on her, and I would prefer not to address that because I don't think that that's fair to her.
Yes, and I agree. And I don't know what's appropriate for these questions, whether it could be, I think that language would be good because I've seen a lot of these, and I think it's off track. It doesn't really seem to make much sense, and also just to understand human psychology. I mean, you've lost your daughter, you don't know what happened, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to address that. And I don't know if y'all want to answer this, but I think it's useful for any of us considering these cases. We deal with, I don't even know what to call it, but these what about this question. So some sort of angle that isn't really fleshed out, that doesn't really fit into everything, but people have as kind of a pet theory that they want you to address. I don't know if you have kind of an overall response to that, but I think maybe something should be said about that.
If I'm understand what you're saying correctly, I am willing to listen to whatever theory anybody wants to send me. I'd be happy to look into it. But I get some really far-fetched theories, people who think that they have solved the crime, and it doesn't work.
And maybe this, I'm not sure where we are on time. It might make sense to go into some discussion here, because I think there's something to think about with where we started today, which was about people's reaction to trauma and people's reaction to trauma. And so I want to start off with an idea, and I think y'all can go with it where you will. But I think, in my experience, that when people are looking at a case like this, or a jury is looking at a case like this, the hardest thing, or one of the hardest things for the defense to do, is to get people looking at it to engage in the story of what happened. And by that I mean be open to the experience from the defendant's perspective, and accept and be in that place in the story of seeing that something terrible could happen to your 2-year-old, and it's not something you could do anything about, that this could happen to you. And I wonder if a lot of our questions about people judging how someone responded to this and all that stem from the unwillingness for people to go there and really look in the face of terrible things that could happen to them any day, and not wanting to even accept that. So I wanted to get everyone's response on that if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think that that's absolutely the case. Is it's difficult for people to empathize with someone whose reactions are so foreign to themselves. I mean, even the language in the last episode, he just wasn't, I can't remember exactly what was said, but it was something along the lines of, he just wasn't upset enough, or he wasn't this, or he wasn't that. Even in the absence of that full body experience of trying to stay regulated so you can speak, even if he was a neurotypical person, everybody experiences trauma differently. And I think it's interesting because when Brick and I had talked about me doing this panel a while ago, and I didn't think this would have been addressed at this point. But what's surprising is, even though it has been addressed, even from the first episode, that people experience trauma differently, people are still asking questions about that. So even though it's been addressed and it's put out there that there is no normal quotey fingers response to trauma, people are still having a hard time accepting that is the case. So yeah, people just have a really hard time. Like, if I wouldn't respond to it like that, why did he respond to it like that? It's just difficult for people to understand. And when you've got people testifying that he didn't act right, it's human nature to go, oh, okay, well, he didn't act right. That must not have been a normal reaction. And I know I would have cried. And so it's just hard for people to do that, to put themselves in his place.
And that's where I want to step back one step and just include that, and you did, but maybe everyone else can include it, is whether you think, and this is what I've experienced, is that people are not very good prognosticators of how they actually will react in that situation. They think they are, but they aren't.
Yeah, and I think that, I hear a lot, why didn't he take her with him? Why did he wait for the police? Why didn't he run back to his baby? But the thing is, first of all, the 911 call took 2 minutes and the officer took 30 seconds to get there. So when he walked out of the gas station, the officer was already there by my math. You don't carry an injured person, a fatally injured person. You don't move them. You get help. Like, that's what you do. That's how it works. But I also think that those things, he didn't always pay child support. He wasn't always there for his daughter. He didn't put her in a car seat. But you know what? I know a lot of people who have done those things who did not kill their child. Just because you make bad parenting choices, that doesn't make you a murderer.
He explained that, he had EMT training and he was reacting in the way that somebody does in an emergent situation with a critically injured individual. And yes, he's a dad of a critically injured individual, but he actually did not just freak out, but implement his training and decide and weigh his options and decide to take the course of action that he thought was best, which was not to move her, either by picking her up out of the car or by driving the vehicle to the gas station or to wherever there was a telephone, because of her position in the car and rattling her back and forth and perhaps, exacerbating her injuries.
Yeah, right. I mean, Rachel and I did the drive-through, and imagine, there's an emergency and you live 2 blocks from a hospital and you're already outside and you can walk 2 blocks to the hospital faster than you can get your injured person into the car and drive to the hospital. Imagining myself in that same position, I would have done the same thing.
Yes, and those, frankly, when I hear questions like that, and they're throughout the emailed questions and the ones I see on Twitter in cases like that, I always feel like it's an indication that the person is thinking about the wrong thing, and how difficult it is to get them to think about the right thing. It's very difficult.
I get that I'm biased. And the question that I keep posing is, what if he didn't do it? And I think that the question is that, what if he didn't do it? What if he did? And I think that my bias is not towards the innocence of Richard Nicolas. My bias is against the way the justice system prosecuted his case. So when you hear me saying these things, it's not that I'm trying to prove his innocence. I'm trying to prove that the justice system failed Asia Nicolas. This episode of Convicted is also brought to you by Chatbooks. I love Chatbooks. They're my great new sponsor, and they create photo books from your Instagram, Facebook, or camera roll, or you can mix and match those and also have multiple contributors. Every 60 photos that you post or choose are automatically printed, including the captions, dates, and locations. Then they're sent to the US for free. If you check out my Twitter, you can see some actual chapbooks. They're beautiful. You won't be disappointed. It's one picture per page. Simple, but classic. You can choose hard or soft cover, and if you want it to be 6x6 or 8x8. And all 60 pages are only $8, and you're guaranteed to love it or your money back. So, go to chatbooks.com/podcast to download the Chatbooks app and get your first series book free with the promo code CONVICTED. Go to chatbooks.com/podcast to download the Chatbooks app and get your first series book free. Promo code CONVICTED. You're really going to love it. Here's the final conversation I had with Richard. I thought you did a fine job on the questions that I asked. So I thought today when we talked, it could just be about you telling me about those things that you thought of afterwards that you didn't get a chance to say.
Again, thank you so much for helping me out with all my efforts here. It's I definitely feel the bigger and better things are out there for me. You know what I'm saying? It's astronomical help. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
You're absolutely welcome. We have about what would you like people to know that I didn't ask you about? And then you can go ahead and give me the answer to whatever you want to talk about that's important to you. This is your time.
I've been incarcerated now for 21 years, and it's for the absolutely worst type of situation that I can fathom. It's the only thing that's kept me going this far is the fact that I've got to prove that I'm an innocent man. It's literally, that's what makes me get out of bed every single day, is the fact that I can't lay back on this type of thing because it dishonors Asia incredibly. It's since I've been here, there is no worse thing than what I'm in here for. There just isn't. And realizing that I have been wrongfully convicted and that I can prove that I've been wrongfully convicted, it's I've got to fight this fight. When I think about the incredible railroading process Baltimore City put me through, it's I can't stand on this because this is a pattern of how they do things. It's happened before me, and it's probably going to happen after me. But I can get onto this podcast, up onto my soapbox one more time, and try to tell people that this type of thing happens down in Baltimore City. When you dial 911, when you have a incredibly bad emergency that you have to dial 911 for, you expect to get help. And those people are supposed to show up so they can aid you, not wrongfully convict you for the most horrible thing on, God's green earth. It just is not supposed to work that way. And how they hid evidence, twisted good science. It's nothing's straight about this whole trial except for the fact that I called them asking them for help after someone shot my baby girl. That's the whole thing. It doesn't get any worse than what they did. So that's all I have to say.
I'm Brooke. Episode 8 will be out sometime next week. Thanks so much for listening. A special thank you to all the panel guests, Brendan, Amber Lee, Rachel, and of course Richard. You can see pictures, download the transcripts, and view other documents at convictedpod.com. The music was created by Blake Maples, and you can see and hear his work at blakemaples.com. I'll see you next week. Thanks so much for listening.